Hi, my dragons. Welcome to my deck. So here's your first recording that we should have done in class today, but now we're on my deck. So I have put a piece of paper up, which is your first intro handout for forensic psychology. So I'm going to go over that, and you can go along with me, read along with me on that handout. And then I'm going to do a PowerPoint, which I will also put up, and we'll go over that, okay? So let's see how that goes. All right. So welcome to forensic psychology, the greatest part of psychology ever. And yeah, this little thing is not working right. Anyway, so I usually start out by asking students what is forensic psychology, and most of the times you guys get it right, so that makes me very happy. So what is forensic psychology? It is a branch of forensic psychology that is part or evolved from social psychology, because social psychology is all about social cognition, which is part of cognitive psychology and social psychology. And social psychology was kind of an umbrella area. So if you go to the APA divisions, American Psychological Association, you look at the divisions, you'll see that it started out with 8 big ones like clinical research, and then it went into perceptual psychophysics, which is the very first part of all of psychology. And it went from there, okay? Social psychology is one of the original 8, so it's a big thing, and a lot of different fields and schools have evolved from that. So within forensic psychology now, you also have divisions. So you have social cognition, you have forensic, you have health psychology, you have cultural psychology. All of those kinds of things are part of social psychology. So forensic psychology started out being referred to as criminal psychology. And then it was psychology and law, and schools started offering majors in criminal psychology, psychology, and law. And some schools still today will offer like a doctorate in PhD in psychology and a law degree, so that you have both, okay? And some schools still use the old name of psych law, which is fine. Division 41 of the American Psychological Association is still called the Psych Law Society, and if you go to APA, you'll see it listed as that. So that's pretty cool. Forensic psychology is broader than psych law. Well, psych law is the umbrella term, but it is broader than its original criminal psychology, because criminal psychology was all about criminal behavior. We do have a major in the master's program here at Tiffin University. It's all online, but it's called criminal behavior, and it focuses on the criminal, why they do things, their motivations to behave the way they do. Forensic psychology is broader. It does incorporate psychology and law, but it also includes all of its manifestations, like the courts, juries, and my area, which is toxic torts. So it includes a lot of different things, and it's very, very broad. So you're going to be surprised at how broad the area is, and when we have students that come here, basically everybody wants to do psychological profiling, but there's so many applications and so many sub-areas within forensic psychology. We, too, have 2 branches in forensic psychology. We have the research arm, and we have the clinical arm. And a lot of students really like the clinical arm, which is actually looking at psychopathology as it applies to crime and things like that, okay? So, forensic psychology, which you're going to learn about in class today, psychology and law, we're going to talk about all those manifestations of all the different sub-areas in forensic psychology. So you'll get a broad taste of what it is like. You won't get a in-depth thing to any one particular sub-area, but you'll know that they exist, and I will give you a taste of some of the other ones. So Dr. Hurwitz and I are more researchers than we are clinicians, although I had a double major in clinical psychology. So I'm well versed in clinical psychology as well. But you'll get more of a research focus, because at Tiffin University we're more of a research focus, but I will give you some clinical information too. So psychology is the study of behavior, and when we say that, it is all behavior and it is all science. Psychology is an empirical discipline. In other words, we advance what we know, our knowledge base, by research. Okay, so you do research, independent variables, dependent variables, and there's my little stray kitty. Oh my God, he came to see us. He's adorable, and he's a Manx, and he has no tail. If you look at his little butt, there's no tail. He'll be expecting some food in a minute. Anyway, back to forensic psychology. So it's empirical, and that's the way we advance the field. There are some main differences between psychology and law that I want to cover, and I'm going to cover more. It's also in the PowerPoint. But some of the main differences, this makes a great essay question, by the way, so put a star by that. So psychology is empirical and it is scientific. We get new research findings and they immediately overthrow what we learned before. So science as a whole, I don't care if it's chemistry, physics, whatever it is, we generally seek to overthrow what we've had in place before. Law, on the other hand, is doctrinal. It's not empirical, it's doctrinal. And the law moves slowly, very, very slowly. It's based on precedent. What happened before? What's our foundation? I would ask you, what's the foundation in the United States? And you should say the Constitution. Remember, Pocket Connie, now you all have one. But that is the foundation of law in the United States. And the law moves slowly because it moves by precedent. And in order to move ahead, you have to overthrow the precedent. And you do that by Supreme Court or court cases, and they take very, very long time to process. So the law becomes frustrated with all science, not just psychology, but also forensic psychology, because we move quickly. Oh, that theory didn't work. It was discredited. Boom, we got a new theory. We've amended it. We've changed it. And that is the way that goes. The law is very, very slow. Another really big distinction that the law doesn't like and psychology doesn't like about the law doesn't like about psychology, is that we are deterministic. So we like to say, especially in social psychology, that the situation has plans for you. That you can walk into any situation and it will change the behavior that you're going to exhibit. The law doesn't like that. The law says, no, the situation doesn't determine how you behave. You determine how you behave. So the law is very free will. Psychology deterministic, the law is very free will. You made a choice to behave that way. We disagree with that, and let me give you an example. So for domestic violence, we would say that, a woman in a domestic violence situation doesn't automatically leave because she may have children, she may be tied by financial limitations, she may be tied by her area or the fact that her family lives in the area, so she's not immediately going to leave her abuser. The law would say, no, she should have just left. And you hear that a lot in juries. They'll use that as a rationale. Dr. Stocker and I often argue about this, determinism and free will. And you see it all through both disciplines. So in some of your law classes, you might say, you know what, that's just a matter of free will. In psychology, they use determinism. They won't like that. Just saying. So we also have different connotations of what the truth is. For a forensic psychologist, the truth is empirical. We say the truth is whatever the data says it is. And I'll tell you something here, lawyers, judges, actors in the courtroom, they do not have to take research methods, statistics, or any sort of scientific analysis like that because their discipline is not rooted in empiricism, okay? So they don't have to do that. And if you ever really want to confuse an attorney or a judge or somebody like that, just start talking about statistics. It is like going into the dark forest as far as they're concerned because they don't ever have to use that. And in the United States, we are not mathematically as literate as we should be. So statistics are very difficult for Americans in general, but especially people in those disciplines where statistics and research is not required. It's difficult for them to get a handle on. So for an attorney, the truth is not empiricism. The truth is the interpretation of the Constitution, and for that they rely on the state Supreme Courts or the United States Supreme Courts. A forensic psychologist would say, but look, those Supreme Court justices are people, just like you and me, okay? So they make mistakes as well, and they're not versed in research. So they can make mistakes. Let me give you some examples. Now, when you get a judge's decision, you'll have the decision all written out, and then you have a part of the decision that's called the dicta, D-I-C-T-A, dicta. And the dicta is the judge's rationale for why they decided the way they did. So oftentimes at the Supreme Court, you'll hear this justice is writing for the majority and this justice is writing for the minority. And in those dicta lie the rationale for why they chose the way they chose. And you can use that in a case if you're making a case to overthrow something or not, okay? So the dicta is very important. It's very revealing, very, very revealing about the way these justices were thinking. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's talk about Buck versus Bell, which was a really famous case, and it had to do with forced sterilization. So back in the day, they would force sterilize people who had diminished mental capacity, whether they had a developmental disability or a mental illness that diminished their capacity for life, for making decisions. And in Buck versus Bell, there was a case where there was an individual who was institutionalized and became pregnant. How does that happen? By someone in the institution, either another resident of the institution or, which was probably the case, a caregiver of the institution, okay? So they became pregnant and the offspring had a disability. They were mentally diminished. And so the battle was, should they force sterilization, and what should we do in that case? Well, in the judge's dicta, the justice actually said, and this is how you want to be careful with your words, because you don't want your words to follow you through history in a bad light, and this is exactly what happened in this dicta. The judge said, because it happened on several occasions, so all the way down the line, you started with the parent, the grandparent, the parent, and then the child, all having offspring, all with diminished capacity. And the justice said in the dicta, and this is a direct quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, which is quite discriminatory by today's standards, but there it stands for all of time and all of history to see. So it's a lot of populations, people with mental illness, the stigma that they have to face, or people with any sort of disability. These are the kinds of sterilizations that were happening. And fortunately, we don't have that today, but Buck versus Bell was overturned. And try and explain that to justices on the Supreme Court is very interesting. The second one I want to talk about is Bellotti versus Baird, which is a Massachusetts case giving teenagers the right to have abortions without consulting their parents. So state of Massachusetts granted that. I'm not saying anything one way or another if that was appropriate or not, but what a scientist or a forensic psychologist would say, well, did they test the decision-making skills of teenagers compared to an adult woman? Do they have the same ability to make decisions, or were they cognitively still developing and their decision-making or critical thinking wasn't equal? Well, no, they did not do that. The Supreme Court and the court in Massachusetts Supreme Court just said, we decree that this is the way it should be. And they use their own assumptions. They don't use any sort of scientific method. For those of us in forensic psychology, that's a big no-no. No. You must do the research, because again, the truth is whatever the data says it is. So there's the difference there in two cases. I'm going to talk on the next one because I have to film these in 15-minute increments. I'll talk about the next one about U.S. versus Doherty, which is another really good case. So I'll see you on the next part 2 of the intro.